This episode of Kids from Yesterday will contain references to suicide, mental health, and self-harm. Listener discretion is advised.
We're back for episode 2.
Welcome to Kids from Yesterday podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in.
I'm surprised anybody listened to us at all, if I'm honest. I mean, not you, but like me. The response has been great, and I know you've heard it already and you've heard it again, but I want to say thanks to Michael and Alexi for recording our theme song. When they have a band name, we'll thank them again, but yes. It was pretty cool of them.
It is a really cool theme song. Thank you so much, guys.
Yeah, it was brilliant. They put a lot of work into it, even though I was like, just record like a thing, and they spent like 2 hours on it, so
yes, thank you guys.
It's amazing. So what are we going to talk about this week, Clodagh?
So this week, as you probably heard from our content warning there, we are going to talk about mental health in the emo culture. So we're going to talk a little bit about our own experience growing up as emos with mental health problems. We're going to talk a little bit about we're going to talk a little bit about how mental health is portrayed in emo culture, the visibility, and we're going to talk a little bit about notable people in emo culture who have spoken out about mental health issues.
Yeah. I mean, growing up, I guess a lot of people, like the implicit association between emo and mental health stuff was people always thought all emos are depressed. And like, as a depressed emo child, it rang true for me, but I feel like it wasn't fair to assume that all emo kids had mental health issues. Just like it wasn't fair to assume that all emo kids that had mental health issues were emo because they had mental health issues. I always felt like I never really thought about it properly until kind of as I got older, but at the time I do remember thinking that it was an interesting thing to assume because so many of my friends didn't display signs of having mental health problems. They'd make fun of people who did, and that was just because of the time. Like, it wasn't anybody specifically doing something about anybody in particular. It was just kind of like, this is the stereotype. You'd see all these stereotypes online, or like in the early memes that we were talking about last episode, like on MySpace and stuff. Like, remember those little, like, they were voodoo dolls, and I has cookie and I ate it or whatever. And like, that was kind of part of the culture, but it was sort of like a them and us kind of divide, I think. So I mean, when I was like 16, I think that's when I had depression, probably really, really badly. But because my understanding of what depression was and what I was going through weren't, like, I didn't see the parallels between it. And like, I'd turn to music quite a lot to soothe me, basically, because I hadn't really got any other outlets. So, I listened to Fall Out Boy, I listened to all those bands we talked about in the previous episode. And it was just nice to hear somebody who understood, I think.
Same, I definitely felt like seen by these bands. Like, I had no idea. I was like 15 when I started going through depression. I had no idea that I was depressed. I just didn't know, because it wasn't something that was ever, discussed. It wasn't something that nobody talked to me about mental health. Nobody had sat me down and kind of had that discussion with me. I didn't really understand it. Obviously, I knew what suicide was. I knew what depression was, but I didn't really know the symptoms. I didn't know the signs. So I was depressed, and I was listening to emo music at the same time, but I didn't really realize what I was going through. But I felt so seen by these artists, like My Chemical Romance, like, I am not afraid to keep on living, you know what I mean? Like, those kind of lyrics, they all rang true for me, and I kind of felt empowered being able to, sing them along at a concert or sing them along at the top of my voice in my room. And I feel like that kind of music was definitely a form of therapy for me.
No, I was the exact same. Like, I have really distinct memories of like writing on Tumblr back in the day. I don't know, I think I must have been 16, 17, and I'd gone to see All Time Low, and it was just acknowledging that that experience made me feel alive.
Yeah.
And like it became escapism for me then. Like it was, you know, you're in a room for 2 or 3 hours, you're seeing different bands, you're screaming along the words, you're in a room with people who want to be there as well, who have like love the band the same way you do, and who care about it and have made friends through it. And it was such an empowering thing to be there, and you could cry and you could like scream and you could be excited and you could feel all your feelings in this really, really safe environment where it was accepted that people would cry, and it was accepted that people would, you know, really connect with what they were saying, and the bands knew that, and they'd have little speeches that they'd make, and it was just such a nice thing to get, even though like you're feeling the way you were feeling, and then you still have this like outlet. But I think because I had those moments where I went and I enjoyed myself and I felt really good, that I kind of believed that, oh no, I don't have depression because, you know, I'm able to feel happy and I'm able to feel really good, and these like this thing makes me happy.
Paramore definitely did do that as well. Like Hayley would always say, like, you know, leave your problems at the door. You're here for the night. We're going to enjoy this concert together. Like, not these exact words, but she said something along the lines of, you know, we're here to have a good time. Just forget what's going on in your life. We're all here together tonight and we're going to have fun. And that was something that really, like, I used to be, like, just bawl my eyes out because I was going through so much in my life. Like when I was a teenager, I was homeschooled, so I was like taken out of school because I had back problems, and like I just felt like that's how I ended up, I guess, becoming depressed, because I wasn't tending to my mental health needs as much as I was tending to my physical needs, and to be able to go to those gigs and kind of just leave everything outside, leave my, you know, my fears about my body and my fears about my illness and my head, and just enjoy the music and mosh and have fun with my friends and cry and make new friends and new memories. Like, I have so many distinct memories of just letting go at Paramore gigs, and that's what those gigs kind of were. Like, they were a way of just letting go of your inhibitions and having fun for a while.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like for me as well, I didn't know how to express how I was feeling. Like,
I didn't either.
I had no idea. And I remember being 16 and my form teacher, I'd been away at like a week-long transition year like taster thing in Trinity, and I came back and my form teacher was like, well, like, how was it? And I said to her, I really, really didn't want to come back here. And I don't know what I was hoping she'd say, but I remember like hoping she'd take the bait and ask me why, and like ask me what was wrong, when instead she gave out to me for saying I didn't want to be in school. But she did try to say it to my parents at the next parent teacher meeting that I'd lost my spark or something. And it was the fact that, like, okay, somebody heard me. But I do feel like music was the best way of expressing it, because I mean it was all very like deep and like, well, emo, but it was still the closest thing I'd ever had to somebody being able to say, well, you know, I feel like this, and I'd kind of go, well, I feel like that too. And I think Fall Out Boy in that particular regard were very special, and like Pete Wentz in particular was really great at describing how I was feeling, even though he was just describing how he was feeling. But it was definitely a really big part of my teenage years. It was not realizing that how, like, what I was feeling was, I don't want to say normal, because obviously it is normal. Plenty of people have mental health problems, but it wasn't normal in the sense that not everybody was feeling this way and not everybody was going through this, and I just didn't have that perspective. So, but I did have, and I think everybody who goes through problems kind of has something that they lean towards, and it can be something that's like healthy to like. So like music was a really healthy outlet. Like going to those concerts was a really healthy thing to do.
Definitely.
And like being involved in those subcultures, like, you know, if you were on Tumblr or you were on LiveJournal or you were on MySpace or whatever the hell you were on, you were involved in something that was outside of what was happening in your head, and I think that was really, really important.
Yeah, I definitely think as well, like, for me, my friends weren't, like, as far as I'm aware, like, even to this day, like, they didn't show any visible signs, again, of having any mental health issues. But looking back, neither did I, because I was I was very outgoing and very bubbly, and, you know, and enjoyed having fun and meeting up with people. But at the same time, I had all this anguish that I just didn't know what to do with it. I didn't know how to talk about it. I didn't know how to express myself. I didn't even know what to tell somebody there was something wrong with me. And I didn't until I was about 17. I think the first time, you know, I actually said I'm not okay to somebody. And music was, especially emo music, I just felt like it was, because I really, really liked it. You know, the rhythm, the lyrics. And then when I started going through stuff, I was kind of like, oh, okay, they see what I'm seeing. I feel what they're feeling. And Pete Wentz as well, I think, was my first kind of real insight into how suicide comes about, because previously I just thought that it was this thing that happened, and I didn't really realise that it could be connected with depression and mental illness. And kind of when I realised and started reading about, I guess, Home Hallelujah and how that was written, and there's a couple of other songs that Fall Out Boy done about
7 Minutes in Heaven.
Yeah, that was another one.
Out of Inhaling.
So many. But it definitely made me realise that depression can lead to suicide, and I kind of started to read about what he was going through, and I was like, oh my god, okay, maybe this is what's wrong with me too.
Yeah.
But no, music is definitely, and it's, like I said again, emo music was more so that it was there for us.
Yeah.
You know, when nothing else was, and nothing else was kind of doing it for us.
I think you posted it on Instagram the other day. It was like an infographic on like signs of depression in like teenagers, and I was reading it and I was like, well, I had all of those.
Yeah.
Like I withdrew from people quite quickly. Like I just stopped caring about everything. Like the only thing I really had was music, and I just was so angry and so upset all the time, and I just didn't know why. But you really had like, I don't know, I spent hours going through like Fall Out Boy lyrics and reading, like Pete Wentz wrote a book called The Boy with a Thorn in His Side, and it was about being a kid with bipolar disorder and how they didn't know how to treat that. And you had like they gave him sugar pills like as a placebo.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so but that was really common because they didn't know kids could have bipolar, and they didn't actually have a definitive diagnosis. Like they knew about manic depression, but like back when he would have exhibited these signs, they assumed that he just needs to grow out of it, or like, you know, they just didn't know kids could have mental health problems, which they obviously absolutely can.
Yeah.
Like kids as young as 6 have been diagnosed with mental health problems, which is really sad. But it was like a short book and it was a really nice story, but I remember just being in tears reading it because it was so horrible to think that he had been brought to get help and nobody knew how to help him, and this was somebody who was so good at describing how he was feeling. Like every single song you listen to, you know, even if it's like a character or it's a story he's telling about somebody loosely based on himself or about somebody else that he knows, you still know and can feel how they felt. So I think he was really, really important to me when I was growing up, like, which is a weird thing to say.
Another person who was quite open in discussing their mental health issues was Hayley Williams. So was it 2009 Brand New Eyes came out? September 27th. I know it was that date.
2010.
Was it 2010? 2009, 2010. Sure, look. Anyway, they released Brick by Born Brick, and that was I think that was their second single from that album. And a lot of people had thought that song was kind of a Hayley telling a story about her own mental health and depression. Some of the lyrics, like, you built up a world of magic because your real life is tragic. We'll go get a shovel and we'll dig a deep hole, you know. People have kind of thought that, and I've definitely had this feeling of like wanting to just dig a hole and get into it. But people thought that was biographical, but Hayley Williams, you know, she did say that it was kind of a story that she had thought up, and it wasn't about herself. The lyrics, she said it was something that she loved the music so much and she wanted to make it this dark story. I know she wrote an article for Paper magazine, and in that magazine she said, you know, people so willingly will be like, it's okay not to be okay, but she said, you know, I'm 30 now, I'm not okay with not being okay anymore. And I get that, because up until this point where Hayley had actually released that letter, going on from what she had said before, I didn't realise that she was actually going through this, because a lot of their lyrics are really angsty, but they don't really reflect back on mental health.
Yeah.
Right?
I'd agree with that as well. Like, I mean, I don't know why, and I don't know what it is about Paramore, but I never felt like when you listen to Fall Out Boy, you know those songs are about Pete Wentz.
Yeah.
And you know that somebody in that band has gone through those things he's talking about. Whereas with Paramore, I don't know why, and I don't know why it took for her to actually say it, but I think it's the fact that she never had spoken about it before that it took her actually coming out and saying, hey, this is about me and this is how I feel. So she wrote the article for paper, and then somebody did an interview with her, I think, about the process of After Laughter, and she talked really frankly about her anxiety. So whoever interviewed her spent, I will post this on the Facebook at some point, but on the Facebook.
So follow us on the Facebook.
It's at Kids From Yesterday podcast.
Yes, something along those lines.
Yeah.
Maybe just, type in your search bar Kids From Yesterday Pod.
You'll find us. But we'll post it there. But it was about the process of writing After Laughter, and this journalist spent like 2 or 3 days with her. Like just talking to her and finding out, but she said on the second or third day that she'd actually had a panic attack after they'd left. And it was just really interesting to hear her talk so frankly about how she was feeling after years of ambiguity, I guess, around it, and not really knowing, but knowing people related to the lyrics. And I guess with all music like that, people will read into it what they want to. So if it meant something to people to hear a song about suicide and like to interpret Brick by Boring Brick by being about that, because they felt that they could relate to it. Like I feel like artists say this all the time, that when they write a song and then they release it, that's yours. And it doesn't really matter what the song was about. It's when the audience hear it, if they want to hear whatever they want to hear in it, that's what they do.
Even on the After Laughter album, she kind of talks about mental health almost with gritted teeth. Like, even with the song Fake Happy, the video is her going around with, the upside down smiley face, but she's like saying, I love making you believe what you get is what you see, but I'm so fake happy. And she goes on, I bet everybody here is just as insecure. She's been doing a good job of making people think she's okay. It's easy for her, she's saying, to stand on the stage, stomp on a beat, draw her lipstick too wide, nobody's going to see her mascara tears. And I feel like that it's very animating what it's like to have fully functioning mental illness.
Yeah.
Like if you look at the lines in another song, which are like, I don't need no help, I can sabotage me by myself. That definitely, I was like, oh my god, that's me. I related to that song so much. I'm like, one of the symptoms of my mental illness is that I'm a huge self-sabotager. And I really related to that. And again, Fake Happy, I was able to relate to that as well. And when they performed that live, it was like, oh my god, she's going through all this stuff. Like the last time I seen them in the Olympia, I think a couple of weeks later it came out that her and Chad Gilbert were getting a divorce. And I was like, oh my god, she was on the stage, she was doing all this stuff, she had a big smile on her face, she was interacting with everyone, and she was going through all this personal trauma. Like she was going through this massive breakup, and it was devastating for her. But you could see how those lyrics were obviously something that no matter what she's going through, she still has to put on a show.
Yeah, and I feel like that's really representative of how people are when they're not performers. I mean, for her, it's very obvious. She's up on a stage and she's performing.
Yeah. But
day to day, people have to perform. Like, they feel like, for most people who have, like, a functioning mental illness where they're hiding their anxiety or they're hiding their depression. And, like, back to when I was in school, I was a functional depressed child.
Yeah.
But it was still, like, I got up and I went to school. And I still talked to people and I still laughed. But at the same time, like, what's inside? And it just kind of shows that you don't ever know what's going on in somebody's head. Like, they could be up on a stage, they could be, serving you in a restaurant, they could be, like, answering the phone when you don't know who you're interacting with, who is going through this. And I do think that is a really important part of the subculture, for, like, previous and current emo kids, that you have all this, like, you have these people who are willing to talk about the fact that, well, actually, no, I am walking around pretending I'm okay and I'm not, when that was such a big part of it.
Yeah, they're like those emo artists, I guess, were huge for us in the in the noughties, in the late noughties. But now I guess one person who's been kind of considered the future of emo, before his untimely death, I guess, was Lil Peep. Not to confuse with Lil Pump, which is something we regularly do. But yeah, like, a lot of people kind of look up to him as somebody who was so outspoken about his mental illness, about his feelings of self-harm and suicide, substance abuse. And and, you know, felt like it was okay for them to talk about their problems because of this person as well. So it's not just, you know, the naughties bands that we're talking about it. It's artists like Lil Peep who come out and speak about it. And I guess there's been a bigger uptake in people nowadays being so willingly open about their situation, whether they're coming out as non-binary like Sam Smith, Janelle Monáe, or they are talking about mental health problems, or they're talking about, you know, what's going on in their lives. But for us, I guess, because our whole world revolved around Kerrang TV, we were finding solace in these people.
One particle of unobtainium has a nuclear reaction with a flux capacitor. Carry the two, changing its atomic isotoner into a radioactive spider.
Yes, science!
So I have a psychology degree, and I'm really interested in how people's brains work, which is kind of fundamentally important when you have a psychology degree. But something that really interests me is when people research subcultures like this. So there are tons of articles out there about emo, but a lot of the time they kind of trickle down. So like you might not see them as an article or as a journal article, or you may not even know how to read them because they're done in a way that's academically elitist, and that's probably another episode or another podcast. But I do think that when you kind of see the trickle down version of what has been found by these psychologists, you're not getting the full story. So you do see sometimes like, you know, oh, emo blamed for whatever. And I know Clodagh has some articles that we're going to talk about in a bit. But I did find some papers that did talk about the link between suicide and emo, as we said at the very beginning, where it's kind of thought that emo and self-harm and emo and suicide are like inextricably linked, that everybody who's emo wants to hurt themselves or wants to kill themselves. So Baker and Boer in 2008 did a research paper looking at other research that already existed and taking the information that they had and just analysing it and discussing it overall. So they found that extroversion is linked to people who liked pop music compared with people who liked heavy metal. And I think we can kind of see that most people who are emo would claim to be also introverted. It doesn't mean that you are introverted because you like it. And I think that's something that's misconstrued a lot in research, or like when you read articles, they kind of say like this thing causes this, when that's not true. It's just they found a link between it, but it's correlational and not causational. Like one did not cause the other. It just, these two characteristics happen to be found in these people. So they found that heavy metal music did not correlate with suicide. And there was actually a positive change in affect for people. So they did, I'm not sure who did this research, but they did a study on people and they basically induced anger in them. So they made them angry. And then for some people, I don't know what they did to make them angry. I feel like somebody would just kind of poke me and then be like, are you angry yet? So I don't know how that bit worked. So this was the condition. So when you do a research study, you have like your participants, and then you have a condition, and then you do the actual experiment. So you'll have a control group, which are people who they know what's going to happen, or they don't do anything to them just to see what the results are. So they tested to see how they felt. Then they made them angry. And then one group of people, they like just, there was nothing, there was just silence. And then the other group of people, they listened to heavy metal. And then they found that their heart rates, so the people who had silence after they were made angry, their heart rate dropped. But the people who listened to heavy metal, their heart rate was sustained, but it didn't make them angrier, which is probably the first time they've seen that, you know, this music isn't angry music. It's not music that makes people violent, and it doesn't make people have negative tendencies. It did nothing. It just continued it, but people reported feeling better after listening to heavy metal, and even more so than people who would listen to the silence. So it's like it's similar to Channel, which I think comes back to what we were saying at the very beginning, which is that it made you feel better. Yeah, like that music made you feel more positive emotions, or it allowed you to feel the feelings that you had. So I do think it in this case there's evidence, like actual science evidence, to suggest that people feel better when they listen to it.
I think as well, like sometimes like music like that is emotional, because this whole thing as well of like listening to sad music when you're sad to just feel what you're feeling. Like I'm somebody who definitely like tries to avoid their emotions, but I will like listen to sad music and go along with kind of what's going on in the song to try and almost like feel what I'm feeling and kind of get it out of my system.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Actually, I'm watching, I don't know if you're watching Dead to Me on Netflix.
I was just about to say.
Oh my god, she sits in the car and blares metal music and I'm like, this is the best thing ever. I want to do this to get like anger out. It seems like, it does seem like cathartic almost just to do something like that.
And I know it's meant to be funny that she's like, oh, this is my therapy or whatever, and then it's like, oh, she's listening to, but there actually is science to support it. So I thought that was really funny, but that was just me being a nerd. But I'm glad you also thought it was funny, even though you were also just being a nerd. So this same study found another study that people who liked heavy metal and rock music were suicidally vulnerable. So it didn't, again, this is not, the music does not cause them to be suicidal. It's just that they're at a higher risk of being vulnerable to suicidal thoughts or suicidal acts. And they found that it was an even higher risk, especially in girls.
Okay.
And now they don't know why. I mean, we could guess why. We could say, like, it could be hormones. It could be the fact that, like, girls are, you know, the bullying that goes on in school can be more psychological than physical.
Yeah, definitely.
You know, there's plenty of things where women aren't listened to in medical settings, and you know, there's just so many things that you could guess that, you know, this is maybe why. But I do think that's interesting because I think people associate suicide with men.
Definitely, especially when you see these, like, you know, mental health is, I guess, yes, it is. Obviously, it's an issue for men. It's an issue for women too. But this whole thing of, you know, men, we need to talk about mental health. Like, men specifically need to talk about it. Whereas,
which they obviously do, but it's just it's a weird them and us way of splitting it. Like, I don't know why we're focusing on one particular population of people.
Yeah.
Like, you're like, you know, men, women, non-binary. Like, it doesn't
everybody. Make sense. Everyone needs to talk about mental health.
And it is a really big killer of everybody. I feel like those statistics kind of skew the fact that, yes, suicide is the biggest killer of men, but the biggest killer of women is also men.
Yeah.
And then the second one is suicide. So it's just a case of, like, everybody needs to be talking about this in some way. We're going to talk about that more kind of towards the end. But this particular study said that maybe, like, one of the reasons that they put forward to kind of suggest why people are more at risk for suicide is not that it causes it to happen, that they hear it in the song and then want to do it. It's more that it's what they call a primed implicit cognition, which is, so if I say to you, like, the word cat, something will pop into your head and you might associate hat with cat, you know, like, there's just whatever you come up with is not necessarily what I would come up with, because your implicit thought about it is based on your experience.
Do you want to know what my thought of cat is? Because I'm so bloody emo. Went straight to Gabe Supporta from Cobra Starship actually has a tattoo of a cat on his leg because of that Fall Out Boy song that goes also... No, it's so intricate, but he thought the lyrics were also into cats, so he has a tattoo of a cat on his leg with also into cats on it, and that's where my emo brain went when you said cats.
So, but that's her implicit cognition.
Yes.
Anyway, but that's a perfect example of it, where, like, I might think of a specific cat or a specific situation, whereas your brain went straight to there because that's your experience.
Yeah.
So what they're suggesting is that because people were so young when they were exposed to the idea that if your life is not going the way you want it to, or you're struggling, that suicide is an option, whereas, like, kids who maybe have never encountered this wouldn't think of it as an option.
Yeah.
And it doesn't explain it, because obviously there's kids who've never heard it referred to in a song at all and have still attempted or died by suicide, but it maybe might explain it, where you're now thinking of it as an option. And I do think that a lot of emo culture has negative coping mechanisms because it started in a way where these were the only people talking about having mental health problems, and then there was no support. There was nobody there saying, hey, you know, this is what you should do, or, you know, therapy is great, or you can talk to these people, or you can look up this stuff online. Like, there was the people didn't know what CBT was. They didn't know. And, like, it was out there. People were getting therapy, but it was the fact that kids who have more agency to access this information online, whether or not it's accurate is a different situation and a different topic. But they had all this information, whereas I don't think we did. And I don't feel like it was known. It was just like, this is a thing, and you could have this thing, and it's okay that you do, but there was nothing to say, like, what you should do to make it better. So that was that study. And then there was another one in 2018 by long, and they said, like, a quote from it was that people are frightened by self-injury, such as suicide. The word suicide frightens people, and so does the word self-injury. And it does. Like, you mentioned suicide and people flip out. And there, you know, there's obviously reporting guidelines on how you're supposed to talk about it. Like, you're not supposed to give details, and you're not supposed to, and a part of that again is the implicit cognition risk, where if you give details on how somebody dies, that is then in somebody's head as like an option. But they're just guidelines there to make sure that people don't harm themselves. But it does freak people out. So when you mention self-harming, like, when we were younger, I think people assumed self-harming was attention seeking. And that, like, if you could see somebody self-harm scars, you could see that they'd hurt themselves recently, that they're obviously looking for attention. And there was kind of an old thought that if you were really self-harming, you'd do it somewhere that nobody could see, because it was supposed to be about your pain and your feelings, even though that's ridiculous. And we know it's ridiculous now, but that stigma is still there.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
So this study looked at, basically, they did an interview. So it's qualitative research where they talk to people in an interview structure. There's no questionnaire or anything. They're just sitting down and they're face to face and they record an interview. So they took 10 therapists and 10 people who self-harm, which is quite a small amount of people, and it's not representative of everybody. But they talked about stigma, and they talked about issues. So they said that self-injury stigma profoundly impacts upon the person's capacity for help seeking and prospects for recovery, which basically just means that if people feel like people are going to judge them, or they have been judged because somebody made a comment about them attention seeking, or they're around people who talk about it as if it's attention seeking, they won't get help because they feel like they don't deserve it, because they feel like, well, I'm doing this thing and it's not.
I can see that.
Yeah, and I could see that a lot. Like, even though I didn't understand it and I didn't have the vocabulary for it, you could see it around you, that people who were hurting themselves, and like I did self-harm as a kid. Like, that was probably made up a really big part of my teens, and I was always trying to hide it because I believed that if somebody saw it and asked me questions about it, they would assume I was attention seeking, because I just couldn't explain why I was doing it, I think. So I do think that's really important, but the most important thing is the fact that people are studying this, that, like, people have been studying this for a few years. And then another study by Adler and Adler, this is a 2007 study, so it's quite old, but they said that the concept of, like, hurting yourself being a deviant behavior, they said that the conceptualization of self-injury in this way, it trivializes the emotional pain, but it does add another level of stigma. And it does, because I mean, I don't know, and I don't know why people talk about this. Like, I remember hearing a parent say to me that, like, oh, kids are hurting themselves because it's cool. And I was just, Clodagh made the best face, because it's the face I feel inside, because it's just,
what?
Like, you know, I just feel like, okay, maybe if you did it once to try it out because somebody said, you know, I'm trying to think, like, what situation. And, like, I feel like, you know, if you imagine it in, like, the craft kind of situation where people are, you know, they're sitting around, they're trying a Ouija board, and then they're going to hurt themselves because it's, I can't get my head around it, but I'm trying to, like, imagine that kind of setting where you're all at a sleepover and you're like, we're all going to hurt ourselves for some reason.
Stranger things have happened. Yeah, do you know what I mean? Like, everything's a possibility. You definitely feel like.
But that's what I think parents are afraid of, that this is what kids are doing at sleepovers. But, like, say that situation is real. I feel like if you do it once, you'd kind of go, that fucking hurt, I'm not going to do that again. Like, I don't see any situation where you would continue doing that, whether for attention or for not, because there would be something wrong, because people instinctively don't want to hurt themselves. Yeah. Unless there's something happening in there. But it's also interesting that, like, the concept of saying somebody doing something for attention, so saying they want to hurt themselves for attention, saying they want to kill themselves for attention, that's a cry for help. And
100%.
It doesn't matter how many times they do it, and I can understand people getting tired of it, especially, like, you know, if it happens repeatedly, but at the same time, like, you being tired of it doesn't take away from the fact that this person, the only way they've seemed to believe that they can get any help from people or any kind of support or, like, have their needs met is if they seem to be in danger.
Yeah, like, there's a lot of articles kind of from, like, say 2006 to, I'm gonna say 2012, that kind of talk about, like, it's, you know, it's journalists, it's music critics, and they're talking about the link between mental health and emo music and suicide and mental health. And a lot of them feed into this stigma that if you're cutting yourself repeatedly, your self-harm, you know, you're engaging in self-harm repeatedly on your arm or somewhere visible, that surely, you know, oh, if they're in that much pain, if they keep doing this, you know, it's just a cry for help, because if they were really in that pain, they would, you know, revert to suicide. And that feeds back into the stigma of, if your self-harm scars are on show, you're doing it for attention. I as well engaged in self-harm when I was, you know, 15, 16, and I can't exactly say why. Like, I feel like I was trying to manifest my emotional pain into physical pain. And I've definitely been through situations more recently where I've been like thinking about doing it again. I've stopped myself, you know, I've got really good self-control, or not self-control, but I've got really good kind of management of my triggers, and I'm able to kind of look after that and keep that in check. But I've definitely more recently, I guess I've been more conscious of mental health and stigma and all those kind of issues now, more so than I was, you know, 10 years ago when I was 15. But I've been able to kind of identify why I'm trying to do it, or why I have the urge to do it, and I can definitely see that it's kind of to manifest or physical pain in replace of emotional pain, to try and match what I'm feeling with, you know, my body. But there's been a lot of articles, like I said, that have been going around. Like, we spoke about this kind of briefly in our first episode. There was the Daily Mail who put up an article about the cult warning for emo culture. Emo cult warning for parents is the headline, and it was written on the 16th of, or published rather, on the 16th of August 2006. So I'm going to read you a couple of sentences from the article just so you can see how bizarre this is and how it just doesn't match up to what we were going through. But it says here, flicking through the autumn glossy fashion magazines, I noticed that some of the models did not look very well. A few of them appeared to be dead. This is because one of the key looks, especially at the younger end of the fashion spectrum, is goth. So again, they were mixing up goth and emo. Faces are chalky white, eyes and lips black. You can wear any colour you want as long as it's black. I wore a lot of black as well during my emo phase.
That's a given.
Swapped out for the odd pair of red skinny jeans though, of course. And purple as well.
I had a pair of red skinny jeans and I fucking loved them. They were my favourite thing. And my like best friend in school had a pair of yellow skinny jeans. So we were like, we were ridiculous. But like, I really liked her yellow jeans, but I couldn't wear yellow either. It was too happy a colour.
Yeah, I had these yellow shorts and I remember wearing them like once or twice. I was like, no, this isn't emo enough for me anymore.
No, I was obsessed with my red skinny jeans. But it was just like, it went with my black and red colour palette, which were the only colours
That's it. They went with everything. So yeah, this woman clearly isn't au fait with the actual emo uniform, which is Converse and black hair and black clothes, and she's obviously saying that it's goth. But there's a couple of different things she says in here, like oh my god, do you remember that song, the emo song, Dear Diary?
I worked with some people a few years ago, and every time, he was a friend of mine, but every time I walked into the canteen, he'd be like, Dear Diary, mood apathetic.
Oh my god!
And I was like, can you not, maybe? But he'd do the whole thing. So, yeah, we should actually, can we play a clip of that?
Dear Diary, mood apathetic. My life is spiraling downward. I couldn't get enough money to go to the Blood Red Romance and Suffocate Me Dry concert. It sucks because they play some of my favorite songs, like Stab My Heart Because I Love You and Rip Apart My Soul, and of course, Stabby Rip Stab Stab.
They talk about this in this article and it's just brought it back to me. Oh my god. I don't jump around when I go to shows. I must be emo. Dye in my hair and polish on my toes. Oh my god, I play guitar and write suicide notes. I must be an emo. The courting of misery and death is a long-established teenage tradition. How many bedroom walls have been plastered with the posters of Mark Bolan or Kurt Cobain? Like, I definitely had lots of Paramore posters. I had an entire wall full of my emo heroes. But I just, like, this article is nowhere kind of near, it's kind of sending a manic panic to the parents about what they should be looking out for in their kids, which is completely ridiculous. And essentially in this article they describe emo as a teenage trend It's characterized by depression, self-injury, and suicide. This article, then there was the death of a 13-year-old girl named Hannah Bond. She died by suicide, and her story was national news because the coroner said that she was obsessed with My Chemical Romance and made controversial comments linking her her being a fan of emo to her death, and made that part of the inquest.
Yeah.
That was brought into court. Or into the coroner's court.
That's such a dangerous thing to do as well. Like, if we go back to what we were saying about those psychology papers, like, you have to be careful when you're talking about people, and when you're talking about psychology, and when you're talking about brains and why people do things and motivations, unless you can definitively say, I did this because of this, or they did this because of this, which you can't. Like, that person, like, she would have had to have said herself, I did this because a song told me to, or I did this because this singer told me to. And even then, it wouldn't, like, there's so much more to it. So making these really dangerous links by saying this person was listening to this and that's why they died, it's dangerous, and it's just misleading.
It's so misleading. There's another article here that the Mail published, actually. It's from 2008, 16th of May 2008, and the headline is Why No Child is Safe from the Sinister Cult of Emo. And this is kind of the one that, started the emo panic, I guess.
I just can't believe we've been in a cult all this time. And
I know. And it's kind of, it describes, what emo is like, and it talks about Hannah's death. T-shirts, studded belts, and sneakers or skater shoes. Hair is important, often dyed black and straightened. Music plays a critical role. American bands such as My Chem, Good Charlotte, and Blink-182. And no doubt many adults would ask, so what? On the surface, it all sounds typically teenage, angst-ridden, overdramatic, and tribal.
That's such a disservice to Hannah herself. Like,
yeah,
she was
100%.
clearly in so much pain, and they were just like, the whole thing is trivializing her experience and what she went through, and she was so young, and it's so sad that somebody that young felt that they needed to do what she did because she couldn't cope with it. Like, that's horrifying. And all of these, like, emo goth panic things where parents are warned about cults, all they do is they trivialize what their kids are going through, and they basically tell them to overlook what's happening inside. Like, people who like kind of darker, heavier music are more vulnerable to emotions.
Yeah.
And that's what all of those research papers say. Like, that is definitive, that there is a definite link between liking this kind of music and having darker emotions. But it, again, like, I mean, she could have been a really big Justin Bieber fan, and the outcome could have been the same because it's what's going on inside her head. And it's just really, really unfair to her, and it's unfair to anybody who has died by suicide, who, like, like, for basically blaming what they liked on why they were feeling the way they did.
Yeah, like, there's bits in here, there's a very dark side to being an emo, which isn't about dressing in black and listening to music with very deep lyrics, like a tip a vulnerable person over the edge. Like, that again, it doesn't really, it's coming from a place of fear and not understanding, like, that, yeah, like what Courtney said, like, you could be a fan of Justin Bieber and have the same outcome. Like, I mean, I was listening to, when I was depressed and I was 15, I was listening to emo music. On the flip side, I was also listening to lots of pop music, Justin Bieber, Beyonce, Katy Perry. I was listening to all that. Miley Cyrus. I loved Miley Cyrus. Don't tell the emos that, but I loved Miley Cyrus when they're listening. I loved Miley Cyrus when I was 15, but you know what I mean? It wasn't because it was emo music that was making me the way I was. It was fucking life.
Yeah, and it can be life, and it can, you can be depressed for any reason, or you can have a mental health problem for any reason. Like, there's plenty, like, I mean, we're talking about on a very basic level depression and anxiety here, but, like, other diagnoses, like, there could be environmental reasons, there could be life reasons, there could be biological reasons. There's no way of knowing, so blaming it on music. But I remember back in the day, like, when One Direction were going to be, like, just before they kind of massively blew up, people would always talk about going and, like, one of them saying to them that they saw their scars or whatever and gave them a hug and said it was going to be okay. Like, there was a lot of stuff around Harry Styles being really perceptive about stuff like this. Whether or not it's true, I don't know, because you do see that a lot where people write like, I had this great experience.
Yeah.
But it's still the fact that this was a big prevalent thing in a very, very poppy community.
Yeah.
And yet people were still talking about suicide. They were still talking about self-harm. So, and this is about like one of the most like popular boy bands of like the what do we call the tens?
The tens.
Is it just the tens?
I think some people call them the aughties, which I don't really understand.
You ought to not call it that.
Yeah.
That's what I think. But like of the tens, they were one of the biggest boy bands, and this was such a big part of it. And even with that K-pop band, SHINee, Jonghyun, he died by suicide last year or the year before. It might have been the year before. But like K-pop is known for being quite a happy thing, and people are just really obsessed with the relationships and the people that are in the bands. So it's really unfair to say that culture is, like emo culture specifically, is about suicide when it's everywhere. It's, you know, it's about teenagers, it's about how they're feeling, and it's about how the world is changing so fast around us. We're so much more clued in than we were before. Like I look now at younger kids who are like 12, 13, 14, and the amount of stuff that they're aware of, like they're so clued into feminism, they're so clued into the environment, they're so clued into like social justice, like words that I did not know when I was their age.
Yeah, I definitely didn't have a clue about any of this.
Like I'm in awe of how intelligent and how smart and how clued in kids are, but it's destroying them, and it's nothing to do with music. It's more that they have this as an escape, and you're going to have people who turn to hurting themselves or to suicide no matter what they're listening to, no matter what they're doing, no matter who they're around. But I mean, we've had some kind of notable suicides in emo culture. Like, I mean, we kind of went through a whole episode without mentioning Chester Bennington. That affected me so much, and it was because I was like 13, 14 when I discovered when I first listened to Linkin Park, and I just like I used to listen to the album and cry, because again it was like cathartic, you listening to this thing, but it was just, this man was in so much pain, and yet he was writing such amazing music, and he was expressing it as well as Pete Wentz was. Like, just, it was just so raw, and it was so, I don't know what the word is, but when I heard he died, I was in work, and I remember I'd like had just picked up my phone, it was at the end of the day, and I turned it over and I fucked it on the floor. I literally was so upset, and somebody was like, what's wrong? And I was like, Chester Bennington's dead. And it like, it took me a while, and I think it was like I was grieving anyway, because my grandfather had passed away the year before, and it was quite around the same time, like the anniversary. But it just floored me. Like, it was so, and I do think that's really weird, and I always think it sounds contrived when people are like, oh, I'm really sad about this famous person who I've never met. But it was just, this was somebody I looked up to, and it was somebody whose music I listened to, and that comforted me. And it was the fact that he had nothing to comfort him. And then Chris Cornell had died a few months ahead of that, so he died on Chris Cornell's birthday, and they were really good friends. So it was just like this ongoing thing of like, people are, when somebody who supports you, I guess, from afar passes away, it's hard. So it's not like, you know, this is a trend and we're all okay with people dying, and we're all okay with like, you know, oh, suicide happens. Like, you miss people, and it's really hard, and it doesn't matter if you know them personally, or they're just somebody in your community, or they're somebody that you've interacted with online, or there's somebody you know in real life. Like, it's not okay. Like, it's just not an okay thing.
Yeah, like, even if you look back to, I guess, Kurt Cobain would have kind of been like the pre-emo, if you can say it that, a pre-emo genre, you know, and he died by suicide, and then if you even come forward this side of the emo revolution, you can see Lil Peep again, not to be mistaken for Lil Pump, but Lil Peep, you know, people did look up to him, and he was very open about how he kind of had spoken about how he knew he wasn't going to be around for long. He had kind of spoken so openly and said that he was suffering, and you know, eventually it wasn't suicide, it was an accidental overdose, but that affected a lot of people. And I didn't really realise that he had died until only, I'd say, a couple of weeks ago. I was listening to some of his music, and I was like, because, you know, we were talking about the kind of the new age emo, and I started listening to his music, and I was like, this is actually quite good. I didn't know how I felt about it, and then I was like, you know, kind of into it. And I could see that he was, you know, in distress through his lyrics. And then I went on his Wikipedia page and I was reading and I was like, la 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 la. And I was like, oh my God, he's dead. I was so shocked. And again, I didn't know him or nothing like that. I think the only celebrity death that really got me, again, this goes back to Sap Clodagh, but Corey Monteith from Glee, when he died, I was so shocked. And I think I was more just really upset for Leah Michelle.
Yeah.
Like, I really, really felt for her. But yeah, you see, it doesn't, mental health doesn't discriminate. It can happen to anyone. Yeah. No matter what your social status is, your wealth, your colour of your skin, no matter what you're, like, who you are, where you come from, it just does not discriminate.
Yeah, and that's the thing, and there's so many songs, like Blink-182 had Adam's song, and like the lyrics are of, like, from a Nirvana song, because that's what he was listening to when he passed away. Like All Time Low, asked Gaskarth with a song called Therapy, and it was about, it's said to be about his brother passing, and how he dealt with that. And I think a lot of people have misinterpreted what the song is about, and they think it's about him saying that therapy is no good, which is not the point. The point was about how he was a kid, and all he wanted was somebody to listen to him and say that, like, it's actually okay that you're sad.
Yeah.
And, like, they've gone on and they've written, like, Missing You and Kids in the Dark, which again are about, like, please, like, hold on, like, we're here and we're listening. Like, we've mentioned Fall Out Boy about 1 million times in this episode, but, like, Pete Wentz has written, like we said, Home Hallelujah and 7 Minutes in Heaven. Like, they're about his suicide attempts. And he wrote a book, and it's, like, semi-autobiographical. Another one. He's written 2 books. It's called Grey, and it was supposed to be called Rainy Day Kids, but it's about a guy, and it's loosely based on his own life, and it talks, like, I wouldn't recommend reading it if you're in a vulnerable place, because it does talk about suicide in kind of semi-graphic detail, but it definitely, like, when I read it, it was so upsetting, because you're like, this is the life that we saw in those songs, but you have bands constantly talking about it. Like, I found a list of music where people were talking about mental health issues. So we have then My Chemical Romance, and like we have I'm Not Okay, we have, like,
Famous Last Words, Welcome to the Black Parade. I guess that was a no, it wasn't. That was a concept album, but the idea was that it was about this patient who had cancer rather than a patient who was suicidal, which is what a lot of people thought by the lyrics and by kind of the songs. But that was such a good album.
It was an amazing album, and I imagine, like, that was probably the first music of that kind that I can think of that talked about an illness killing somebody, and not in, like, a physical illness. Obviously mental illnesses are illnesses, but
physical one,
like, but if you think back, like, back, you have, like, Nobody's Home by Avril Lavigne. Like, like, I remember listening to that album and being really sad, age 10, like, and not knowing why, but it was just, like, that song is about depression. And then My Immortal, Evanescence.
Oh yeah, of course.
Super freaking sad. When It Rains, Paramore.
Bop.
I have so many. We're going to put all these into a playlist. This is going to be our episode 2 playlist. Most of these are Fall Out Boy songs. I don't apologize in the slightest. We've forgotten to mention new age emos as well. 21 Pilots.
Oh yeah, I don't really get that.
They said something. I think they said something transphobic on Twitter, so I'm kind of ambiguous now about how I feel about them. I don't know the full story. I only saw screenshots. I didn't see the actual things, but anybody who's accused of transphobia usually has done it, so take it with a grain of salt. But they did, I know one of them had a heroin addiction, and he was writing songs to kind of help him get through it. But one of the songs, Car Radio, I remember when I first heard that, I was like, the same thing again, where you feel like, I actually feel really seen by this song or by this band. So you can imagine that new wave of people going, well, this represents how I feel too. And there's tons of them. Like, there's so many. And when you look into kind of what songs are about, like, you know, I found out a few You Can't Sweat Out is about Ryan Ross's dad and, like, his dad's alcoholism. And I didn't know this. I had no idea. It was when I was looking at Camisado what that was actually about, because that's one of my favorite songs. But I just hadn't really thought about it. And again, it was down to, like, I interpreted it in a way that meant something to me. But when you actually read what the song is about, you're like, okay, well, they meant for this to be interpreted in a different way.
And that's the thing, like, so many of those songs, and like, they were one thing, but, you know, I took them for face value, but then I kind of realised, when I started to realise there was actual meanings behind these songs, I started to really get into figuring out what the meanings were, and what does this album cover mean, and what does this, you know, signify. And I think Foley Do by am I pronouncing that right? Foley Do by Fall Out Boy, when that album came out, that was my first kind of experience at really going behind the lyrics. And, you know, I remember asking my dad, what are America's sweethearts? Like, I don't really understand what that means, and like trying to like figure out what the lyrics were, because of course I'm pretty sure back then you couldn't just Google what does this song mean. There was no like Genius back then. There's another one as well, but there was no websites like that where you could like find out the lyrics and the meanings from people who, you know, the artists themselves who may have spoke about in articles. Like, most of the time, if you were trying to find out the meaning of a song, it was by fans like ourselves who would come up with theories and come up with ideas, and that's how you would get it. But there's so many of them that were, you know, we were listening to like Nobody's Home by Avril Lavigne, and you didn't even realise they were
it was just like,
but you're just feeling this sadness for some reason.
It's a sad song. But on that, about people hearing what they want to hear, I was reading a website, and it was like a list of songs that they were like, this is about, it was like a mental health wiki, I think, which it was a fun Wednesday 2 a.m. dive into what songs are out there. But, you know, I was reading the list, and you had your Fall Out Boy, and you had this, and you had Evanescence, and then I got to Green Day, and they were like, well, there's Brain Stew and Basket Case, and you're like, yeah, okay. And then they had Longview, and I was like, that is a song historically about blowjobs. But it is a thing of like, they heard whatever they wanted to hear, and maybe it meant something to them, but that,
ended up on that list.
Yeah, as far as I know, that's about blowjobs. So, yeah, good job, people. So thank you so much for tuning in and listening to us talk about all of this. If there was anything in this episode that affected you, or you feel like you need to reach out to anybody for support, in Ireland we'd recommend you checking out Pieta.ie, so it's Pieta House, their support for suicide and self-harm. And if you're in Ireland and the UK, there's Samaritans, which is 116 123. Number is the exact same for both countries, and you don't have to be suicidal to reach out to Samaritans. They are there for any problem, and that was something it took me quite a long time to learn, that you don't have to be in a serious crisis to reach out to them. It's just if you're struggling and you have nobody to talk to, and you want to talk to somebody who's just going to listen, and that's what they do. That's a great place to reach out to.
Yeah. So again, thank you so much for listening to our podcast. You can find us on Instagram. We're at kidsfromyesterdaypod. On Twitter, we're at kidsfromyesterdaypod. On Instagram, we're at kidsfromyesterdaypodcast. You can find us on Facebook by typing in Kids From Yesterday Podcast. We do post Spotify playlists for each episode. That normally comes out a couple of days before the episode. So our first episode is up there, as well as the playlist for that. And I guess currently the playlist for this episode is out as well. It will include kind of some of the songs you referenced, some of the bands we referenced, because we know you will be absolutely itching to get into that emo nostalgia with us.
If you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts, it would mean the absolute world to us if you could rate and subscribe, because apparently that's really important. We actually got to number 3 on the music charts last week, which was
so cool.
Really, I didn't know that was a thing. It means more than one person listened to it, so...
Yeah, it wasn't just my mom. And as well, if you could maybe write us a little review, say something cool.
Yeah, you can do an emoji, I don't know,
a thumbs up,
an XD, a RAR.
XD RAR, anything.
Yeah, anything at all. That'd be amazing.
Really cool.
We'll see you guys next time.